On a humid Thursday afternoon in Brookdale, a small suburban town known more for its manicured lawns than its moral compass, 16-year-old Aaliyah Jefferson stepped off the school bus wearing her Honor Society badge and clutching a binder filled with college prep materials. A straight-A student with dreams of becoming a civil rights attorney, Aaliyah radiated confidence as she walked the 3 blocks home. But that confidence would be tested when a black-and-white cruiser slowed beside her. Officers Daniels and Brooks, both white men in their mid-40s, eyed her with suspicion. "Where are you going?" Daniels barked through the roll-down window, his hand already inching toward his holster. Aaliyah froze, confused and scared. "Home," she replied, voice trembling. "This is my neighborhood." Without another word, the officers jumped out, demanding identification. When she hesitated, confused, nervous, and unused to being interrogated, Brooks grabbed her arm. "We've had reports of someone casing homes," he muttered, ignoring her protests. Aaliyah's heart pounded as Daniels shoved her against the patrol car. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, yet no one intervened. "You don't belong around here," Daniels sneered, patting her down. She tried to explain who she was, that she'd lived on the same street for years, that her mother worked in City Hall, but the officers weren't listening. Instead, they called for backup. "Suspicious female juvenile," Daniels muttered into his radio. Aaliyah, humiliated and terrified, could barely speak as Brooks tightened cuffs around her wrists. Her binder spilled on the pavement, honor roll certificates, a flyer about a youth leadership summit, and a letter from a congresswoman recognizing her activism. Daniels glanced down at the papers and scoffed. "Looks like you're playing pretend." A crowd began to gather, recording the incident on their phones, murmuring uneasily as the officers pushed Aaliyah into the back seat. No one knew what to do, until a black SUV pulled up, tires screeching. Out stepped Mayor Cassandra Jefferson, Aaliyah's mother, still in her City Hall blazer. She had received a frantic text from a neighbor and rushed from a budget meeting. Her eyes blazed with fury as she marched toward the cruiser. "Uncuff my daughter. Now." For a second, the officers blinked, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Then Daniels scoffed. "And you are?" Cassandra's lips curled into a grim line. "Mayor Cassandra Jefferson. And this is Aaliyah Jefferson, my daughter." Daniels paled. Brooks stammered something incoherent. The cameras now trained on the mayor as she pulled out her ID and jabbed a finger toward the body cameras on the officers' uniforms. "I want every second of this footage pulled. You assaulted an innocent child, profiled her in broad daylight, and used excessive force, on the mayor's daughter." The crowd gasped. The officers fumbled to unlock the cuffs, but Cassandra wasn't done. "Do not touch her. Internal Affairs will handle this." Inside City Hall later that evening, the mayor called an emergency press conference. By then, the video had gone viral, Aaliyah's face, streaked with tears, plastered across national headlines. Cassandra Jefferson stood tall at the podium, Aaliyah by her side. "Today, my daughter was not protected by the very people sworn to serve our community," she began. "She was targeted, humiliated, and criminalized for walking while black." Her voice never wavered. "And if this could happen to the mayor's daughter, what's happening to children without power, without cameras, without protection?" The room was silent. She called for an immediate investigation into the department's practices, the suspension of both officers without pay, and the creation of a civilian oversight committee. Reporters fired questions, but the mayor was resolute. "Justice," she said, "doesn't rest on titles. It rests on accountability." The applause from the crowd thundered through the hall, as her words rippled far beyond Brookdale. The backlash was swift and powerful. Civil rights groups descended on Brookdale, holding peaceful protests and town halls. National media outlets covered the story extensively, and public pressure forced the police chief to address the situation. Daniels and Brooks were placed under formal investigation, and internal records revealed prior complaints of racial profiling, complaints that had been ignored or buried. Meanwhile, Aaliyah became a symbol of youth resilience. Invitations to speak at youth conferences poured in. Despite the trauma, she stood tall, using her voice to advocate for reform. At her high school, students organized a walkout in solidarity. "Protect Black Girls" signs waved above their heads as they marched through downtown. The mayor, honoring her daughter's courage, pushed for policy changes, mandatory racial bias training, increased transparency in policing, and a youth-led council to advise City Hall. Brookdale was no longer just a quiet suburb. It had become ground zero for a necessary reckoning. Behind closed doors, however, tension simmered. The local police union tried to discredit Aaliyah, painting her as defiant and uncooperative. Right-wing pundits ran stories questioning the mayor's objectivity. But Cassandra and Aaliyah stayed united. They didn't flinch when false stories spread. Instead, they doubled down on truth. Body cam footage showed Aaliyah's compliance and the officer's aggression. Witness testimonies confirmed her innocence. Even conservative town board members, once reluctant to act, found it impossible to ignore the evidence. The union's campaign began to unravel. Public opinion sided with the mayor's family. Protests remained peaceful but powerful. Murals of Aaliyah appeared on walls. Schools held Justice Week programs inspired by her story. The momentum was unstoppable. And at every press appearance, Aaliyah reminded people, "This isn't just about me. This is about every Black girl told she doesn't belong." Months later, the investigation concluded. The findings were damning. Daniels and Brooks were found guilty of misconduct, unlawful detainment, and excessive force. Both were fired, stripped of their pensions, and barred from future law enforcement roles. The department's internal affairs unit was restructured, and a new police chief, an advocate of community policing, was appointed. Cassandra Jefferson signed legislation expanding police oversight and launched a scholarship fund for marginalized students interested in public service. Aaliyah was the first recipient. She used the platform to visit schools across the state, encouraging young people to speak up against injustice. In a town council meeting, one elderly white resident stood and said, "I didn't understand what systemic racism looked like, until I saw it happen to Aaliyah. Thank you for opening my eyes." The room erupted in applause, not just for Aaliyah, but for the courage she'd ignited in others. The incident that began as a routine walk home had become a catalyst for transformation. Brookdale wasn't perfect, but it had changed. Streets bore new murals, classrooms had new dialogues, and policing had new standards. Aaliyah remained humble through it all. When asked in an interview what justice meant to her, she replied, "Justice is knowing that next time a Black girl walks home with books in her hands, no one sees her as a threat. They see her brilliance." And with that, the story came full circle. From fear to fortitude, from silence to strength, Aaliyah's journey reminded everyone that justice isn't passive, it's fought for. And in this case, it prevailed. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you found this content meaningful, click like and subscribe so you won't miss the next powerful story. Tomorrow, we'll bring you another that matters.